Welcome to Virginia City. I'm your host, Chick DeFrancia, and I'll be taking you on a personal tour showing you the history, sights, and sounds of this most unique area. Virginia City, home of the world-famous Big Bonanza and the Comstock Lode. It was at this site right here on June 8, 1859, that the Comstock Lode was first discovered. The credit for discovering the lode goes to two Irishmen, Peter O'Reilly and Patrick McLaughlin. They had a small placer operation here in the summer of 1859, taking out quite a bit of gold and silver here. It was at that time that the third man stepped into the picture, Henry Comstock, known as Old Pancake because he was too lazy to fix his flour into bread. Comstock talked himself into a 1/3 share of the lode and became a 1/3 partner. It was the same summer of 1859 when they were taking the precious metal out of here of the Ophir, when a curious prospector took a sample of the blue stuff to Grass Valley, California, where an assayer by the name of Melvin Atwood ran tests on it. They were amazed to find out that it was almost pure silver, over $3,000 a ton. And of course, the rush to Washoe was on. The Californians came over with plenty of money. They bought these shares out very, very cheaply. It was in the summer of 1860 when a man from Grass Valley, California came over. His name was George Hurst. He bought a 1/3 interest, McLaughlin's interest here, for $3,500 and took out $91,000. That was the beginning of the Hurst fortune. Comstock sold out for about $11,000. McLaughlin, $3,500. O'Reilly held on just a little longer for $40,000. So for a total of $53,500, the Ophir was sold. It later would produce over $15 million. That's about $197.5 million at today's exchange rate. The Ophir diggings truly lived up to its biblical name, which means a faraway, distant land filled with riches. In the decade before the discovery of the Comstock Lode, thousands of prospectors were lured to make the trek across the United States to the California gold fields. They stopped to water and rest their stock along the Carson River at the present-day site of Dayton. While there, they washed the gravel of the river in their pans and found only a few dollars worth of gold a day. Nothing in comparison with what they hoped to find in California. Their rockers and sluice boxes were continually clogged with a blue substance that hampered their gold mining efforts. Mexican workers commented, "mucho plata," meaning much silver. But this fell on deaf ears to prospectors who were only interested in discovering gold. Most of these men moved on to California, while a hardy few stayed on and prospected their way up Gold Canyon through Silver City, known then as Johntown. In 1857, the Grosh brothers, Hosea and Ethan Allen, established a small placer operation near Silver City and were investigating the mineral properties of that blasted blue stuff. They knew this was silver and were ready to develop investors for their claim when Hosea accidentally struck his foot with a pick and died from the infection. That November, his brother Ethan Allen set off to have a sample from the claim assayed. At Squaw Valley, California, he was caught in a blizzard and both of his legs were amputated from frostbite. He died after the operation, and the lode kept it secret for 2 more years. Others placer mined northwest of Dayton up through 6 Mile Canyon, unknowingly working their way towards the lode. Meanwhile, Henry Comstock, Peter O'Reilly, Patrick McLaughlin, and others continued to placer mine up through Gold Hill and on and over the divide to the site of the Ophir diggings. On June 8, 1859, O'Reilly and McLaughlin made the discovery that came to be known as the Comstock Lode. One of the early prospectors, James Fenimore, also known as Old Virginia, was making his way home after a night on the town. He stumbled, breaking his bottle of whiskey, and not wanting to waste a drop, he christened the spot Virginia Town. Later, as the population grew, Virginia Town became Virginia City. Here in the Virginia City Cemetery is the monument dedicated to Captain Edward Story, one of the early pioneers and heroes of the Comstock. It was the summer of 1860 when the Paiutes rose up against the local whites. In the first battle that occurred at Pyramid Lake, Major Ormsby was killed. And then 3 weeks later, another group of volunteers, outfitted and led by Captain Edward Story, would do battle once again with the Paiutes. This time, only 3 whites were killed. One was Captain Story. Story County was named after Captain Edward Story, of which Virginia City is the county seat. There are over 20 different cemeteries here, the final resting place for hundreds of Virginia City residents. During your stay in Virginia City, you may want to visit this historic monument. The highest point in Virginia City is Mount Davidson, over 7,700 feet in elevation. It was July the 4th of 1860 when Donald Davidson and his mining friends scaled the summit. They planted the American flag, and right on the spot, the miners christened it Mount Davidson. Other early pioneers on the Comstock were Ely Orme and Sandy Bowers. Ely Orme, known as the Washoe Seeress, ran a boarding house in Gold Hill for the miners. In payment for her services, she was given a 10-foot section in the original lode. She combined this 10 feet with Sandy Bowers, who also had 10 feet, and this 20-foot produced $1.2 million. Ely and Sandy built a beautiful home with their fortune, Bowers Mansion, located on Highway 395, halfway between Reno and Carson City. The site was where Ely formerly did the miners' laundry. Bowers Mansion is now a state park. Due to the tremendous volume of ore in the Comstock Lode, it was obvious that deep rock mining was to prevail. Here at the Way It Was Museum, you can see many outstanding examples of how underground mining was actually accomplished, and other interesting artifacts from the heyday of the Comstock Lode. The Lode was the world's largest mechanized underground mining operation at that time. A network of tunnels, drifts, stopes, and winzes that ran for over 750 miles beneath the surface, the distance from Virginia City to Phoenix, Arizona. The geothermal heat underground was tremendous. Temperatures averaged 130 degrees day and night, year-round. Root blowers were installed to bring air from the surface up to 3,000 foot above, down to the stope where the ore was being removed. At the lowest level, men could only work for 10-minute periods. It took 4 men to do the work of one. They drank 2 to 3 gallons of water per day and were given a daily ice allotment of 95 pounds per man. Working in 130-degree temperatures, they encountered scalding hot sulfurous streams of water. The tunnels were filled with gases and foul air. Due to these adverse working conditions, these miners were paid $4, made only 85 cents a day in the tin and coal mines. In hoisting, pumping, timbering, and other areas, innovations developed on the Comstock led to the industrialization of mining around the world. Never in the history of mining had engineers been confronted with the problem of extracting ore from leads up to 65 feet in width. Philip Diedesheimer, a mining engineer from San Francisco, found a solution to the problem when he invented square-set timbering. Later, in recognition of this, he was appointed as superintendent of the Ophir mine. Timbers 12 inches square were notched to interconnect top and bottom. Thousands of acres of timber were put underground, enough wood to build 27,000 two-bedroom homes. Necessity being the mother of invention, H.S. Halliday invented this flat metal cable, which was used to raise the heavy metal hoisting cages. Later on, this same cable technology was used in the San Francisco cable car system. Cornish water pumps were used that weighed up to 160 tons, with flywheels 45 feet in diameter. These were giants compared with the pumps used in the British Isles. In the Savage mine, one of these pumps was placed on line, running continuously, pumping 1 million gallons of water per day. At the end of 2.5 years, the water was lowered only 50 feet. Such was the problem encountered with subterranean water. Early drills were invented in order to cut through rock and do exploratory drilling faster due to the incredibly hot temperatures. These drills made the old single and double jack drilling methods obsolete. In order to deal with the tons of ore that were hoisted from the mines, mills were built to process and pulverize the material, to ready it for amalgamation, which was the separation of the precious metal from the rock. Of the more than 100 mills in the territory, the California Pan Mill, built in 1875, had 70 stamps and was the most complete mining plant at that time. Virginia City was an industrial town. The air was constantly pierced with the sounds of whistles calling workers to their shifts, the explosion of shafts being blasted, and the heavy sound of machinery grinding as the ore was being milled. The 30 to 40 trains a day that were hauling lumber, supplies, visitors, and workers in the town, and carrying ore, all contributed to a constant, noisy din. There were fortunes to be made on the Comstock, to be sure, but not without high risk. When an accident took place, a miner might be lucky and find himself in the care of the Good Sisters of Charity here at St. Mary's Hospital. St. Mary's, built in 1875, is now a center for the arts. Most miners, however, would end up in one of the many cemeteries, as mining accidents were often fatal. The men were packed in hoisting cages like sardines. If the cable broke, they would raise a stone in a cemetery. The cage would plunge up to 1,000 feet or more. There was no point in attempting to collect the remains. If a man were to be caught in a sudden rush of scalding water, he'd be a goner, boiled on the spot. The miners were also exposed to noxious fumes. They fell into shafts or were struck by fast-moving hoisting cages. They suffered injuries from drills, hammers, and were caught in cave-ins and underground explosions. April the 7th, 1869 was a tragic day in Comstock history. That Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., a fire broke out in the Yellow Jacket mine in Gold Hill. The fire spread to the shafts of the Crown Point and Kentuck mines. Due to the massive amounts of lumber and other combustible materials, the fire burned for over 1 year. 45 men died as they had no means of escape. 3 years later, the rock below ground at the 800-foot level of the Crown Point and Kentuck were found to be red hot. Such was the intensity of this fire. These miners truly were the heroes of the Comstock. For the living hell they endured every day, it's no surprise that these men demanded and received the highest miners' wages in the world. The Collar Mine, located in southeast Virginia City on F Street, was founded in 1861 by Billy Collar. It was the 5th largest producer on the lode at $17 million and is an original mine that is open to the public for tours. On your 30-minute visit, you will experience Comstock mining history. You'll see ore stopes, original square-set timbering, and authentic mining machinery. One of the Collar tour guides, John Wilburn, will show you how single-jack drilling was accomplished before the invention of burley drills.
The Comstock miners single jack with a bar of drill steel and a 4-pound hammer. They would hit the drill steel and turn it. This would drill holes into the solid rock 3 to 4 foot deep. It would be packed with black powder, and then they would call fire in the hole, light the fuse, and set it off.
Also on the tour, you'll have the same experience as a Comstock miner, working at 2,000 to 3,000 feet when a sudden draft would blow his candle out. Total darkness. There's another mine tour you can take up on C Street at the Ponderosa Saloon. This tour takes you into one of the drifts of what used to be the old Best and Belcher mine. Tommy Thacker, your guide, will show you many aspects of Comstock mining.
Being on an approximately 45-degree angle, that's about like a 20-story building is how much you drop vertically. But, as I said, this being capped, how it works.
This half-hour tour gives you another opportunity to learn more about mining on the Comstock. The wealth of the Comstock Lode extended from Virginia City south to Gold Hill. There the Belcher, Crown Point, Yellow Jacket, Kentuck, Imperial, and the Empire produced $90 million. From 1859 to 1879, $400 million was taken in gold and silver from the Comstock mines. That's well over $5 billion at today's exchange rates. The bare bones of many mining operations can be seen against the Virginia City hillsides. One of the most famous is the combination shaft. I'm standing at the site of what was once the deepest hole in the earth, the combination shaft, 3,260 feet straight down. You could fit Sun Mountain into it more than 2 times. Over However, several $1 million were speculated on what turned out to be an empty hole. In October of 1886, the last Cornish water pump was turned off, and the combination and all other mines in the area flooded to the depth of the Sutro Tunnel. This is the original site of the Virginia City branch of the Bank of California, now the Ponderosa Saloon. Built into the back wall of the building is the vault that was used to store millions of dollars in gold and silver, waiting to be transported to San Francisco. In 1864, William Ralston established the Virginia City branch of the Bank of California. He appointed William Sharon as the branch manager. At that time, the mines were in Borrasca, meaning they were played out. A great deal of money was needed in order to progress with deep rock mining. Many mine owners borrowed heavily from the bank, causing it to be known as the octopus, as its holdings increased from mines to mills, water, timber, and ultimately in 1869, the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. Ralston, Sharon, Darius Ogden Mills, and Alvinza Hayward formed the Union Mill and Mining Company under the Bank of California and controlled all the producing mines on the Comstock, along with 17 stamp mills. Meanwhile, back in San Francisco, Ralston began to foolishly speculate with the bank's assets. With its reserves seriously depleted, a run was made on the bank on August the 26th, 1875. And at 3 p.m., the mighty Bank of California went under. 6 weeks later, Sharon and Mills, along with other prominent San Francisco businessmen, reorganized and reopened the bank. The sheer volume of wealth extracted from the mines required a means of transportation to move the ore to the mills and the bullion to either the mint in Carson City, which was in operation for 23 years, or the San Francisco Mint. Massive amounts of supplies had to be brought in to support the mining operations and the rapid population growth. As the mines went deeper into the earth, entire forests from the Sierra were clear-cut to supply wood for the timbers in the mines and to fuel steam engines in the mines and mills. Teamsters had been hauling ore and supplies with freight wagons at $4 a ton. Wells Fargo and other agencies transported the bullion to the mints. In the meantime, William Sharon saw the opportunity to achieve financial control of the Comstock with the construction of a railroad. Because of his connection with the Bank of California, William Sharon was able to put together the financing for the Virginia and Truckee Railroad by soliciting subscriptions from the various counties in the state, who gladly paid for the privilege of having a railroad come through their county. Ground was broken in February of 1869, and the 21-mile stretch of track from Virginia City to Carson City was laid at a cost of over $83,000 per mile, for a total of $1,750,000 when completed in the fall. The Virginia and Truckee, the famed queen of the short lines, was the crookedest railroad in the world. In 21 miles, you could make a complete 360-degree circle 17 times if you total all the curves along this route. Its rails were specially forged in Sheffield, England. Some were still in service until they were removed and sold for scrap 72 years later. Its 6 tunnels were lined with zinc, so sparks from the smokestacks wouldn't burn the timbers. The Virginia was the first locomotive to be put online. It was hauled up Geiger grade by a 14-yoke oxen team. Geiger grade had been built in 1862 as the northern route into the Comstock by Davison Geiger and John Tilton. It was rerouted and paved by a WPA project in 1936. The Virginia, built by Baldwin Manufacturing of Philadelphia, was one of 29 engines named after counties and communities in Nevada that hauled the 35 to 40 freight and passenger trains a day through the Comstock. In Virginia City, the train ran down E Street through a tunnel in front of St. Mary's and unloaded its freight here at this depot. The trains were maintained and refueled at the Roundhouse in Carson City. 3 years later, the line was connected with the Central Pacific Railroad in Reno. The Virginia City Chamber of Commerce is located in what used to be the bullion car for the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. By the 20th century, the mines had been played out for decades. The final run of the V&T was in July of 1938, bringing to a close the end of an era of steam-driven trains on the Comstock. 12 years later, the line between Minden and Reno was traveled for one last commemorative run, this time pulled by engine number 27. In Virginia City, old number 27 is still on display near the train depot. Funds are being raised to restore this locomotive and put her online once again. Much of the rolling stock of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad had been sold to movie studios or scrapped, and number 27 is the only original V&T engine left in Virginia City today. In 1976, Bob Gray fired up the V&T line, and today you too can ride the queen of the short lines. Take you on a section of the original 51-mile route of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. Our conductor this day was Bill Meakin, sporting a fresh beard in preparation for his role in the production of the Mountain Man Ballet. The engine is switched to the front of the train at tunnel number 4. Route takes you past many interesting and historical sites and relics on the Comstock. The V&T runs daily from May 30th through October the 2nd. The big bonanza lasted but 6 years, from 1873 to 1879. It's a story of 4 Irishmen, led by John Mackey. His partners were Jim Fair, James Flood, and William S. O'Brien. They own the majority of the stock in the 2 big bonanza mines, the Consolidated Virginia and the California. Those 2 mines in 6 years produced a staggering $105 million worth of precious metal. John Mackey came with the first rush to Washoe in 1860. He worked as a $4 a day laborer for several years, working his way up to superintendent of the Kentuck mine, while acquiring shares of stock in several other mines in exchange for his work. In 1872, Mackey formed a partnership with James Fair, who was superintendent of the Ophir mine, and with San Francisco saloon owners turned stockbrokers James Flood and William O'Brien. Their partnership enabled them to acquire control of the Hale and Norcross. They invested $100,000 of their profits for controlling interest in the Consolidated Virginia and the California mines, which were thought to be played out. Shortly thereafter, a new vein of silver was discovered in the Con Virginia at the 1,160-foot level that widened into a 148-foot solid block of high-grade silver, as high and as long as a football field. The Big Bonanza. The $61 million taken from the Con Virginia made it the all-time leading producer on the Comstock. The $105 million taken from these 2 mines would equal over $1.3 billion at today's rates. The Mackey Mansion was actually the mining office of the Golden Curry mining and milling operation. John Mackey moved into this building when his Virginia City residence, the International Hotel, was destroyed in the Great Fire in October of 1875. The Mackey Mansion is open to the public today for tours and is authentically furnished. John Mackey was one of the most well-loved men on the Comstock. His generosity was almost boundless, and it was said it cost him $50 every time he crossed the street, as he often helped those in need. John Mackey married Marie Hungerford Bryant, who established a palatial lifestyle in Paris, France. She commissioned Tiffany to create this candelabra, part of the grandest and most ornate silver service of its time. 1,250 pieces made from a half-ton of big bonanza silver. Mackey invested part of his millions in the Commercial Cable Company, later known as the Postal Telegraph Company, which laid the first transatlantic telegraph cable. His granddaughter Ellen married the much-beloved composer Irving Berlin. On June the 7th, 1908, the Mackey School of Mines was dedicated at the University of Nevada, Reno. For over 10 years, San Francisco was financially dependent upon the wealth of the Comstock mines. Millions were invested in San Francisco real estate and manufacturing. The four Silver Kings built the Nevada Bank of San Francisco that later became part of the Wells Fargo Bank. James Flood erected the Flood Building, and James Fair crowned Nob Hill with a magnificent Fairmont Hotel. And today, these tailings are all that remain of the Big Bonanza, the greatest concentration of mineral wealth in all the world. The present-day state of Nevada was originally part of the Utah Territory. In 1861, the Nevada Territory was created, and James Nye was appointed governor. Samuel Clemens' brother, Orion, was the territorial secretary. On April the 12th, 1861, Fort Sumter was fired upon by Southern forces, and the Civil War began. At that time, there was no Red Cross to help the sick and the wounded. There was, however, a similar organization known as the Sanitary Commission. More money was raised per capita in Nevada than in any other state in the Union for this cause. The largest sum raised for this purpose was through the sale and resale of a sack of flour, which was known as the Sanitary Sack of Flour. $6,000 was raised for its sale in Austin, Nevada. Mark Twain, then on the staff of the Territorial Enterprise newspaper, heard of the infamous sack and telegraphed a request to have it brought to Virginia City. Over $25,000 was raised on the Comstock for the sick and the wounded of the Union Army. By 1864, the United States Treasury was exhausted from the war. President Lincoln looked toward Nevada and its rich Comstock mines as a source of untapped revenue. He also needed 3 more Republican supporters to pass the 13th Amendment, the Emancipation Proclamation. Nevada's first proposed state constitution was defeated as it taxed the mines in their entirety. Another convention was called, and a second constitution was framed and adopted in which only the output of the mines was to be taxed. President Lincoln proclaimed Nevada a state on October the 31st, 1864, and in January of 1865, the 13th Amendment was ratified, liberating some 3.5 million slaves. Because Nevada was a territory at the opening of the Civil War and became a state later during the war to help uphold the Union, Nevada was rightfully called Battle Born, which is the official state slogan. As the territorial legislature had sat in Carson City since 1861, Carson City was deemed the state capital, and 10 years later, the Capitol building was erected. The first 5 United States senators from Nevada had their roots in Virginia City. In 1864, former territorial governor James Nye and William Stewart were elected as Nevada's first United States senators. In 1866, William Stewart introduced a law in Congress to create a committee on mines and mining. He was the author of the National Mining Laws, the 15th Amendment, and many bills for the return of the silver standard. He was a friend of the Negro and took an active part in Reconstruction. James Fair, one of the Silver Kings, and William Sharon of the Bank of California were also elected senators in subsequent years, as well as John Percival Jones, superintendent of several large mines on the Lode. In 1868, Ulysses S. Grant was elected president, and he never forgot the debt the nation owed to Nevada for its help in the Civil War. This is where Ulysses S. Grant stood on October the 27th, 1879, addressing the citizens of Virginia City. This magnificent mansion was the office for the Savage Mine and home of the mine's superintendent. The Savage was one of the leading producers on the Lode. During Grant's visit, he was given a tour of the consolidated Virginia, and upon his arrival to the surface, he was quoted as saying, "That's as close to hell as I ever want to get." The Savage Mansion is still a working mine office and not open to the public, but it's one of the most outstanding examples of Victorian architecture in Virginia City. During the Big Bonanza, Virginia City had a thriving population of approximately 22,000 people. It had the second largest Chinese population west of the Mississippi, as many of them had settled here after helping to build the railroad. Neighboring Gold Hill had a population of 10,000. Throughout this period of wealth and prosperity, from 1859 through 1879, the mines were producing, on average, the staggering sum of $50,000 per day. The business section of town was first on B Street and later encompassed C Street. The very first Roos Brothers, the forerunner of Roos Atkins Men's Store, was established in Virginia City, along with the Bank of California, Wells Fargo, and dozens of grocery and hardware stores to serve Virginia City and the Divide. The miners and other local citizenry belonged to the Masons, Oddfellows, Knights of Pythias, Knights of Columbus, and other fraternal organizations. Every holiday was cause for celebration. A visiting cleric stated, "In Nevada, they observe the Sabbath the way we celebrate the 4th of July." Everyone speculated in mining stocks, from the lowliest stable boy to the wealthiest mine owner. The pulse of the Comstock was in direct response to the ups and downs of the mining stock market. Stocks were manipulated and wild claims were made about strikes that many times were falsified. On the other hand, when high-grade ore was struck, often miners would be kept underground for days at a time so that word of the strike would not get out before owners had the chance to buy up any available stock before the prices rose. In 1860, the Territorial Enterprise newspaper moved from Carson City to Virginia City. This is the original composing room, now a museum located in the basement of the Territorial Enterprise gift shop on C Street. Dan DeQuille was mining editor here for 31 years and is famous for writing The Big Bonanza. In 1873, James Fair invited Dan DeQuille down to the lower depths of the Con Virginia to be the first reporter to tell the world of the riches of the Big Bonanza. He also gave a young upstart writer his first journalistic job west of the Mississippi.
Well, yes, Joe Goodman and Dan DeQuille gave me, as a young man, my start at the Territorial Enterprise. $25 a week. That might not sound like a lot of money now, but you must remember, in 1862, $25, well, 20 cents would buy you a full meal across the street at the Delta. And that included your sarsaparilla. Oh, I know, you've heard the story how I took my pen name on the river. 2 fathoms, safe water and all of that. It's hogwash. No, I took my pen name right here. You see, John Piper had the corner saloon. And we used to put the paper to bed and go over for a libation. Well, I would walk in with one of my drinking friends, Joe or Dan or Steve Gillis. Not all 3 of them together, mind you. I couldn't afford that, but one at a time. And on occasion, John Piper would mark a credit for one of his favorite customers, of which I'm proud to say I was one. Well, it got to be such a regular thing, and a good thing it was, that no sooner would I walk in through those swinging doors of the corner saloon with one of my drinking friends from the Enterprise here, and the regulars would shout out, "Mark Twain!" And John Piper would mark 2 on the board behind the bar. Yes, I covered the legislature, the territorial legislature. I have never seen a body of men with tongues so handy and information so uncertain. Why, they could talk for a week without ever getting rid of an idea. If any one of them had been on hand when the Creator said, "Let there be light," we never would have got it. Well, come visit Virginia City in the Territorial Enterprise Building. I might be right here to personally greet you.
Water. It was a major problem on the Comstock. With a growing population, it needed a supply of good drinking water, and the sulfurous mineralized liquid that was pumped from the ground was unfit for human consumption. It was in 1873 that Herman Schuster, who engineered the Spring Valley Water Company in San Francisco, developed a water system for the Comstock. The solution to the water problem lay in the Sierra at Lake Marlette. An inverted siphon that used no pumps or mechanized means propelled the water down 1,800 feet to a network of pipes over 7 miles in length across the Washoe Valley and up and over the Virginia Range to Virginia City. The 21-mile-long system was built in just over 6 weeks and delivered over 2 million gallons of water per day. It was considered a very modern feat of engineering at the time. And today, every drop of water consumed in Virginia City still comes from Lake Marlette. This was one of the original sections of pipe that was first laid in the year 1873. The International Hotel, built in 1877, was one of the most famous buildings in Virginia City. It was the first structure built west of the Mississippi to have an elevator and was 6 stories high, with 160 elegant rooms and suites. Many of the mining entrepreneurs lived here and were called Washoe widowers, as their wives and families lived down below in San Francisco. The hotel had an excellent restaurant that was compared with Delmonico's in New York. The stars who played at Piper's Opera House across the street stayed here. On December the 12th, 1914, long after its days of glory, the International Hotel burnt to the ground. The International Hotel was located at C Street and Union. Now the hotel site is a parking lot, but a trompe-l'oeil painting of the grand old lady graces the side of Grandma's fudge. The miners loved good entertainment in their free time. Virginia City had several opera houses that hosted theatrical talent from all over the world, as well as bear fights, boxing matches, comedians, magicians, you name it. The most famous theater in Virginia City, though, is Piper's Opera House, and it has survived to this day. Harry Houdini, Enrico Caruso, Al Jolson, John Philip Sousa, Edwin Booth, Maud Adams, Lily Langtry, Lotta Crabtree, Sarah Bernhardt, John Barrymore, and all the greats of the entertainment world from the late 1800s to the days of vaudeville played here. The legendary Ada Minkin appeared here as Mazeppa and won a great following. Seats sometimes went for $100 apiece. If an act was especially favored, the miners would shower the stage with silver dollars and nuggets, or sometimes present actors with solid silver bricks. The floor of the Opera House is specially constructed with large steel springs beneath its wooden planks to give much livelier footing for dancing. The stage is raked, meaning it slants slightly from back to front. The oleo curtain is embellished with advertisements from businesses in Virginia City. When Mark Twain was on the lecture circuit promoting his book, The Innocents Abroad, he was given a grand welcome here by patrons of Piper's Opera House. Today, the Opera House is still in use for concerts and ballets. Gambling seems indigenous to Nevada, and Virginia City was no exception. Besides betting on the wild animal fights and boxing matches I mentioned, poker, faro, also known as bucking the tiger, chuck-a-luck, money, and roulette decided many a fortune on the turn of a card and the roll of the dice. Later, when mechanical slot machines came into use in the latter part of the 19th century, these one-armed bandits became the preferred method of gambling for many. All the gambling devices I've mentioned, as well as this beautiful collection of slot machines, are on display in the Virginia City Gambling Museum. During the bonanza years, there were more than 100 saloons in town to serve a population of 22,000 people. Today, many of the saloons are still open to serve you, and most are decorated with interesting artifacts and photographs from the bonanza days. The Delta, the Crystal Bar, the Bucket of Blood, the War Show Club, formerly the private club of the Big Bonanza Millionaires, which surpassed in luxury any gentleman's club in the western United States. The Silver Queen Saloon features the magnificent Silver Queen, whose dress is made up of 3,261 silver dollars and are insured for $500,000. Virginia City bars are famous for continuing in the spirited tradition of their past. During the late 1800s, there were 17 breweries in Story County that distilled their own brands for thirsty bar patrons. One survives to this day, the Union Brewery, the only brewery in the state of Nevada. Rick Hoover brews his own brand of beer here at the Union, and also has an outstanding collection on display in his beer museum. The red light district of Virginia City was superior to any other from Denver to the coast. It was traditional after a night of pipers to visit the line on D Street. One of the most famous characters in Comstock history was the kind-hearted prostitute Julia Bulette. She was one of the hundreds of prostitutes who lived in the cribs or houses of prostitution that used to line D Street. On January the 20th, 1867, she was strangled by John Million. He spent a year incarcerated here in the Story County Jail beneath the county courthouse before swinging into eternity at the end of a rope on April the 24th, 1868, in one of the gayest and best attended events of the era. Fire was a constant threat in a town where brick mansions stood cheek to jowl with wooden shanties. Lumber was stacked high in the yards for the mines. Kerosene lamps and wood fuel stoves lighted and warmed the population. At 5:30 in the morning of October the 26th, 1875, a lamp was knocked over in the basement of Kate's Lodge, igniting the largest fire in Virginia City history. A notorious war show Zephyr blew the hot embers from roof to roof, and in a matter of a few hours, the town was almost entirely leveled, at a property loss of $10 million. The Comstock Firemen's Museum contains some fine examples of the equipment that was used to fight this fire and many others. Besides the many homes and businesses that were lost, 2 of Virginia City's churches burnt to the ground. The only survivor was the Presbyterian Church, located here at the south end of C Street. The Catholic Church, St. Mary's in the Mountains, was rebuilt at a cost of over $65,000. No expense was spared in the construction of this Gothic Revival church. The Episcopal Church, St. Paul's, was rebuilt of wood. The interior is entirely pegged. Not one nail was used. John Mackey contributed greatly to the reconstruction cost of both these churches, as they were dynamited during the Great Fire of 1875 to create a fire break to save the Virginia mine. The county courthouse also fell victim to the Great Fire of 1875. It was rebuilt at a cost of approximately $150,000 in less than a year. A unique feature of the building is the statue of Justice, who presides over the front entrance. Unlike most statues of Justice, this one is not blindfolded, and both of her scales are even. Justice was always able to see that justice would prevail over the Comstock. Many beautiful homes were built in Virginia City. One that is open to the public is the castle, located on the south end of B Street. It was originally built in 1868 by Robert Graves, superintendent of the Empire Mine in Gold Hill. This mansion still contains the beautiful furnishings that were brought from all corners of the globe to decorate this residence. The Fourth Ward School was built in 1876 and was called the Centennial Building. It was the first school building built west of the Mississippi to have drinking fountains on every floor and had the very modern touches of central heating and gas lighting. There were 16 academic and vocational classrooms as well as a gym on the top floor. Former student Albert Michelson won the Nobel Prize in Physics for discovering a method by which to measure the speed of light. The Fourth Ward School was abandoned after the last graduating class of 8 students in 1936. For many years it sat empty and neglected. Today it has been restored and houses an historical museum and is a center for the arts. It is one of the few wooden Second Empire-style school buildings of its size which still survives in this country. This is the entrance of the famed Sutro Tunnel, about 3.5 miles as the crow flies from Virginia City. In 1878, the tunnel was open and was cause for great celebration. One of the ongoing problems in the mines was water. Subterranean streams of hot sulfurous liquid threatened to fill the miles of shafts as soon as they were dug. A huge Cornish water pumps worked day and night draining the mines. This was a very expensive process. There had to be another way. Adolf Sutro had been working on this problem since the early 1860s when he envisioned a 20,498-foot tunnel located at a depth of 1,650 feet that would drain the waters from the mines to an outlet on the other side of the flowery range of mountains to the east of Virginia City. The tunnel was begun in October of 1869 and completed in July of 1878 at a cost of $3.5 million. There was one drawback, though. The maximum depth of Sutro's tunnel was 1,650 feet, and many mines extended to a depth of over 2,500 feet. Water would still have to be pumped up over 1,000 feet in order to be drained from the tunnel. The town of Sutro was built at the mouth of the tunnel. More than 1,000 people lived here during the big bonanza years. They had their own newspaper and would travel to Virginia City through the Sutro Tunnel on mule-drawn rail cars, exiting the tunnel by way of the connecting mines' hoisting cages. Sutro realized over $1 million in sales of stock in his tunnel. He invested this money in real estate holdings in San Francisco, later building the Cliff House, site of the famous Sutro Baths. He inaugurated his own company, the Sutro Trolley, to convey visitors to the Cliff House. Sutro also built his own library containing 125,000 rare books and manuscripts that he had acquired in Europe. These were lost in the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906. This giant of a man who exhibited great personal courage, integrity, fortitude, and was a genius of an entrepreneur, was later elected mayor of San Francisco, where he died in 1898 at the age of 68. By the year 1880, the Comstock Lode was played out. In the 40 years until 1920, only $55 million were produced by mines still in operation. This amount, combined with a total up to the year 1880, would bring the wealth extracted in gold and silver from the Comstock Lode to approximately $6,500,000 at today's rates. In 1951, the Territorial Enterprise newspaper was revived by publishers Lucius Beebe and Charles Clegg. They brought a spirit of new vitality to the Comstock, hiring such notable writers for their editorial staff as Walter Van Tilburg Clark, who 11 years earlier in Virginia City authored the Oxbow Incident. Their international circulation of the newspaper numbered over 5,000, even though there were only 400 Virginia City residents at that time. Beebe and Clegg lived here at John Piper's former residence on A Street. Virginia City experienced another bonanza in 1959 when the television series Bonanza premiered on NBC television. Every September, Virginia City is invaded by ships of the desert. Camels were originally used to haul salt across the high desert to supply the mills. which used the salt in the amalgamation process. In 1960, the first camel race was won by film director John Huston, who was a nearby Dayton filming The Misfits. It was a challenge race between the San Francisco Chronicle and the Phoenix Gazette. The race course then was on B Street. Now the celebrated Virginia City International Camel races include costume balls, parades, ostrich races, and belly dancers. King Farouk should have been so lucky. Virginia City also hosts the Fireman's Muster, the Virginia City Hill Climb Ferrari races, the Cinco de Mayo International Chili Cook-Off, on- and off-road bicycle races, and parades for all occasions. Wintertime brings a new perspective, as the mountains of the Comstock are blanketed with snow. Christmas on the Comstock is always a delight for both children and adults. Virginia City offers a myriad of entertaining shops, mouth-watering candies, beautiful glass art objects, antique photo studios, handcrafted jewelry, and several fine museums. People come from all over the world to enjoy fine jazz music at the famous Silver Stove Restaurant. A great vacation getaway, there are many motels and fine bed and breakfasts such as the Gold Hill Hotel, the oldest operating hotel in the state of Nevada, featuring international cuisine and great entertainment. The Collar Mansion, the original Collar Mine office and superintendent's residence. It has been carefully restored and is the only mansion on the Comstock that is now a bed and breakfast. When Marilyn Monroe was filming The Misfits, she chose Edith Palmer's, probably the oldest bed and breakfast in Virginia City. Its graceful ambiance has provided the perfect setting for many weddings and social gatherings. For more information about lodging or events, call these numbers. You enjoyed your tour of Virginia City yesterday and today. And come by and see me the next time you're in town. If you would like to know more about Virginia City and the Comstock Lode, I recommend you read these books. One of the finest books ever written about Virginia City is The Big Bonanza, written and published by Dan DeQuille in 1876. The Silver Kings by Oscar Lewis, published in 1947, will give you the biographies of the four men we talked about, Mackey, Fair, Flood, and O'Brien. The hardback has been out of print for some time, but the paperback edition is available. Roughing It by Mark Twain, first published in 1868, is about Twain's adventures out west. The book includes the time he spent on the Territorial Enterprise newspaper. Ralston's Ring, published in 1937 by George Lyman, is a history of the mighty Bank of California. The hardback edition has been out of print for some time, but you might be able to find a copy of it in your local library. Silver Hillside by Barbara Richnack. This book has hundreds of vintage photographs of old Virginia City. The history of the Comstock Lode from 1850 to 1920, published by the Mackey School of Mines, University of Nevada, Reno. The Silver Short Line is a history of the Virginia and Truckee Railroad, written by Ted Worm and Harry Demeraux.